that opens the door, because the Saudis will demand it, to a conversation about a resolution to the Palestinian Israeli challenge, but hopefully a two-state solution.
So you are on House Intel, so let's pivot to national security with the time we have remaining. I want to ask you about something that will undoubtedly be a topic of conversation between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu today at the White House. There's new reporting out of the New York Times that U.S. intelligence has concluded that Iran is looking for a shortcut that would enable them to turn their stockpile of nuclear fuel into a workable weapon, not within years, but rather in a matter of months. Is that timeline accurate?
Well, I would say that I don't think anybody out there believes that Iran is years away from getting a nuclear weapon. I can't be terribly specific about this, but I would say it is already a matter of months. If they decided to go forward with the weaponization and all the other little things you need to do around alloys and the concentration of uranium to do it, I think it's a matter of months today. It's one of the great tragedies of tearing up the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. The Iranians said, fine, we'll just go, we're going to not give inspectors the access that they had before. We're not going to have the transparency, and we're going to fire up the centrifuges again. So, and it's a fascinating moment, right? Because if you're an Iranian regime leader right now, you say to yourself, wow, the Israelis took out my air defenses. I'm completely exposed right now. I no longer have control of Syria. I can't use that. Hezbollah, Hamas, my proxies are shadows of their former selves. They're coming for us. And therefore, we should really accelerate the process of having a nuclear weapon. Because if we have a nuclear weapon, they're not coming for us. On the flip side, of course, is the risk that if they do that, some combination of Israelis and others attack. But it feels to me like a very, very scary moment right now.
The previous shorthand was that they could have a nuclear weapon within 18 months. Is it a shorter runway than that now if they shortcut some of the traditional ways of developing a nuclear weapon and try and hurry out of the gate with something perhaps less sophisticated? I know you can't talk out of school, but
Yeah, no, all I can do is not be super specific. But the answer to your question is yes. There are absolutely circumstances, if they were particularly adept at hiding some of the research that they would need to do around miniaturization, which I think, they're pretty adept people. Do we have the transparency that we had 7 years ago? Absolutely not. So no, I would, just sitting here right now, I would say that if they decided to sprint, they could have a weapon inside of 18 months, in my opinion.
So you mentioned the possibility of negotiations referring to the JCPA 2 weeks ago in the Oval Office. Donald Trump seemed to crack the door open ever so slightly to talks when he said that he hoped Iran was open to making a deal. Is there anything that you can tell us about perhaps what you're hearing behind the scenes? Do you think that any Iranian overture would be welcome in Washington, D.C.? Would it be welcome from the Israelis? We're certainly in a different scenario now than we were at the beginning of the Israel-Gaza conflict.
Yeah, I don't want to speculate on how the Israelis might think about it. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu, there's not much question in my mind that he's been, trying for a very long time to get the United States to join him in a military attack on Iran. The way Donald Trump thinks about it, there's sort of two interesting aspects to that. Number one, Donald Trump will consider any deal, right? I mean, the guy wrote a love letter to, Kim Jong-un and went and visited him in North Korea, right? This is a guy, and to some extent, I sort of appreciate this. This is a guy who'll try to do a deal with anybody. He sort of defines himself as the guy who can do the deal. By the way, rumors are that he would like a Nobel Peace Prize if he could somehow bring an Iran deal that would achieve some goals for national security and maybe open the place up a little bit. That would be on the table. And here's the other interesting thing. One thing, again, there's not a lot I appreciate about Donald Trump, but I do think he is allergic to the thought of a Middle Eastern war. And I think that the prospect of an attack on Iran that led to a ground war, now you've got our ships being attacked in the Persian Gulf, you've got terrorism throughout Europe, you've got American troops on the ground. I think he looks at that and says, not on my watch. And so for those two reasons, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that he might try. And look, a lot of this resides with the prime minister, right? We're looking hopefully to phase 2 of a peace deal. if the prime minister can muster the political courage, and it's going to take a lot of political courage to go through with phase 2 and phase 3 of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, that opens the door to conversations with the Saudis. And, though it is not the moment for the Israeli people, that opens the door because the Saudis will demand it to a conversation about a resolution to the Palestinian Israeli challenge, but hopefully a two-state solution. But anyway, you can see a sequence of events that if the prime minister feels he can show a great deal of political courage, might actually, lead to some good things, including the isolation of Iran.
And finally, Congressman, Secretary of State Rubio was in Panama over the weekend, where he warned the government there that they must reduce Chinese influence around the Panama Canal. And Panama announced shortly afterwards that they would not be renewing their agreement with China's Belt and Road Initiative when it expires. Is that welcome news?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's welcome news that we're dealing in realities now, right? Donald Trump, in his inauguration speech, lied and said that the Chinese run the Panama Canal. It's just not true. It is true that the Chinese have a presence there in ports, and yes, that's uncomfortable. And look, we'll take the wins where we can get them. Now, I sort of worry about, what we've just seen with Colombia, with Mexico, and with Canada, where we've basically just put a gun to their head vis-a-vis tariffs and said, unless you do what we want, we're gonna crush your economy. By the way, it would also crush our economy. And then they give up things that are not all that spectacular. Mexico is planning on moving troops to the border anyway. Canada has said they'll buy a helicopter and do some other stuff. I do worry, though, when alliances are more important than ever, that bullying ought to not be the first tool that we use. So, especially in Latin America, right? Latin Americans deep in their souls have a suspicion of, Yankee imperialism. So, anyway, I'm not going to say that what this administration has achieved with Panama and Venezuela and Colombia are bad things, but there is a limit to your ability to bully Latin Americans and ultimately achieve what we want to achieve with respect to drugs and migration and that sort of thing.
Congressman, well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. I'm Philip Wegmann. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. We'll be right back after the break.